Hi everyone, my name is Kat and welcome back to the channel Simple Music Theory, specifically right now focusing on simple music theory for guitar. In the last video, we talked a lot about major scales, so if you haven't seen that video, you should definitely go and watch it because everything that I say in this video is with the assumption that you've watched and understood the last video. But today, we're going to start with a super brief overview of the important things we talked about in the last video. What is a major scale? How do you play one? And then we're going to talk about turning the single string scales that we practiced for understanding in the last video into the types of patterns that you might be more familiar with and that you might be more used to playing. So this is an important video and very exciting because we're talking about major scales in a way that you probably encountered them before. And without further ado, let's start with a little review. I know I talked a lot in the last video, so when I say a brief review, I mean brief. And if you want any more details about anything that I say, or if it's not making sense to you, go rewatch the last video, dive a little deeper. But the things that I want to refresh your memory on really quickly before we do an example tying it all together is first, we define scale as a sequence of notes. And so a major scale is just a sequence of notes with a specific pattern. We express that pattern with whole steps and half steps, and the pattern for the major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Also remember that when you're using that pattern, whatever note you start on is going to be the name of the scale. So if you start on E, then it's going to, and you use that pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, then that would be the E major scale, or whatever note you start on. Remember that every major scale contains every letter, so if you start on E, you're going to have E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E again. The difference is you just have to figure out some scales have sharps or flats, never both. You have to figure out where the sharps or the flats go on each of those letters. Again, talked about this a lot in the last video, so if that doesn't make sense, go check that out again. And remember, when we talked about the C scale, we said the C scale is particularly easy to remember because there are no sharps or flats. So when you figure out the C scale, it's just every letter, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and that's it. That's the C major scale. So to tie that little review together, let's play the C major scale. The C major scale starts on C, and so using the single string scales we played in the last video, it's easiest to start low, so we can just go all the way up on the same string. So if you remember how to figure out from way many videos ago, how to figure out where the easiest C note is, it's going to be on the 3rd fret of the A. So remember, you start on the open A, the next note could be called A sharp or B flat, and then B, and then C. So we're on the 3rd fret of the A string. Now we think about that pattern again, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And let's play it once just with that pattern, and then let's play it with note names. So we're starting on the 3rd fret of the A string, and that's C. And then we go up a whole step, so that's the 5th fret. We go up another whole step, so that's the 7th fret. We go up a half step, whole, 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 half. We can play the whole thing going down again, just reverse the pattern. We end on C again. Now this time, if we play the same pattern and we remember figuring out note names and we think of those slashes like we did a super long time ago, if we start on C, a whole step up from C is D, and a whole step up from D is E, and then we go a half step, and remember there's a slash there, so there's no sharp or flat between E and F, and then we have G, and then we have A, and then we have B, and then we have C. So we have confirmed what I already told you, which is that the C major scale is really commonly taught as a first scale because it contains no accidentals. So no notes have sharps, no notes have flats. It's just every letter without accidentals. You might be thinking, okay, great, that all made sense. But I'm also using books or other videos or a teacher to learn guitar, and they've all shown me scales. And the scales do not look like that. And the scales also don't make that much sense to me. And if you Google C major scale for guitar, you might get something like this. And that looks a lot more confusing than the way that we just broke it down and talked about it. So the whole steps and half steps are so easy to see when you're just going up one string. the way scale patterns are taught at the beginning, sometimes the relationship between the notes is not that clear, and that can be really confusing. And this is one of the difficulties of learning guitar compared to other instruments, especially conceptually. There's a lot of instruments that are very linear, and what I mean by that is, again, imagine a piano. The low notes are on the left, the high notes are on the right, and each of the notes, if you go moving from left to right, then the notes go up a tiny bit, up in pitch, all the way to the end of the piano. Or if you play woodwinds. I've never played a woodwind instrument, so I don't know that much about them, but you can play a specific note, and then you do a different configuration, you play another note, and you're playing one note at a time. And so on these different instruments, it kind of makes more sense conceptually to be playing scales because you already can only play one note at a time. And on an instrument like piano, all the notes are going up linearly, so it's easier to see this pattern that we talked about of whole steps and half steps. And to me, at least, it just makes a lot more sense. Versus when you look at scales in the guitar neck, it's so confusing because a guitar is kind of like a two-dimensional instrument. Not only can you go up and down, but you can also go left to right. All that is to say, I showed you the single string scales first because I think they make more sense conceptually, and they help you start to build this sort of mental map of how notes fit together and how scales fit together. But that is not the most efficient way to play those scales. And in a real playing context, if you were soloing, or even if you were working on a melody, you would not be playing scales that way because it's uncomfortable, it's inefficient, you have to move your hand a lot, you can't play them very fast. If you're trying to play fast, you're going to miss notes because you're doing so much excess movement. So those single string scales are for understanding and for figuring out what notes are in each major scale. However, when you actually go to practice the scales in a playing context to work on dexterity or to work on solos, you want to play them, I'll call it horizontally. So that one you could think of, that was like more vertical. That's really good for understanding, but we want to unlock more horizontal playing. And this ability to play horizontally is very challenging as a beginner on guitar because it's just a different way of thinking and there's a lot of redundant notes and that can be confusing. But it's also one of the superpowers of guitar and one of its strengths and something that makes it such an interesting instrument. That is a tongue twister. Such an interesting instrument the more that you learn and the more that you play. So right now, we're going to talk about our first steps into horizontal playing, I'll call it. And we're going to talk about how to turn the C scale that we learned into the type of scale pattern that you've probably already learned from videos or teachers or from a Google search. Our first step is thinking about what we know about the C scale. We know that every note name is going to be in every scale, so we're going to have all the letters. We know, and we just proved, that the C major scale has no accidentals, so we already know the notes. So we're going to start again on C, and we know that the next note is D. So the way we were playing it before is we went up a whole step, because remember, we can think in terms of note names, or we can think in terms of that pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we go up a whole step, we know the next note is D, and we were playing it on the 5th fret of the A string. That's a valid option, but think about what we talked about a few videos ago when we talked about patterns on the fretboard and how to learn notes a little bit quicker and a little bit more efficiently. And we talked about that 5th fret secret, how the 5th fret of every string except G is the same as the next open string. So again, what that means is the 5th fret of the A string is D, and the next open string is D. We're going to apply it to a scale right now. So we were just on C. We go up a whole step for the next note, which is D. So instead of playing it on the 5th fret of the A string, we can play the open D string. And look at the comparison. So we had this way, and that's still a reasonable stretch. I mean, you could play that, but when I play the 3rd fret of the A string, and then I play the open D string, my hand didn't have to move at all. I could leave my finger there, play the next string. That's a lot more efficient. And the less your hand moves, the more precise your playing can be, and the more efficient your playing can be. So that's why it's really important. Okay, thinking about the pattern again. Again, we could be thinking in terms of whole step, half step. We could also be thinking in terms of letter names because C is a very easy pattern to remember. But whatever way we're thinking about it, So we have C, we have D, then we have another whole step, and we know that note is E. We're starting on open D, a whole step from there is just the second fret, and that's kind of another easy step. You don't have to move your hand this much. So we're gonna pause right there again, and already look at what a big difference this is. What we were playing before, starting on C on the 3rd fret, then playing the 5th fret for the note D, already I have to slide my hand up. I can slide up to the 1st finger or I could slide up to the ring finger, but the way we were playing the scale before, after 2 notes I already have to move my hand again, which over time leads to less precise playing and more inefficient playing. Whereas we're taking advantage of the redundant notes on the neck of the guitar. We're starting on the 3rd fret of the A string, and now we're playing open D, and now we're playing the 2nd fret of the D string. Look how little my hand moved there. Amazing. Let's keep going. We have whole, half, so we know the next step will be a half step, and we also know that that note is F. And so look how easy that is. We're playing the 3rd fret of the D string. So we have C, D, E, F. Again, we can think in terms of whole step, or we can think of the next note name, which is G. And if you remember your open strings, you already know that the next open string is G. So we have C, D, E, F, G. We know the next note is A, and it's a whole step, so we're just going to play the 2nd fret of the G string. And after that, we have another whole step, which is B. And if you remember the names of your open strings, how beautiful is that? The next open string is a B. And then we have a half step as our last step of the scale. And we're back on C. So just look at the difference. We're playing the exact same notes, just on different strings. Here's the C major scale like we were playing it before. And you could see how much my hand was moving. Depending on how long the neck of your guitar was, it might have been actually kind of hard for you to play all the way up here, versus exact same notes, because the notes are redundant across the strings. This time we could play it like this. And look how little my hand moved, and it makes it a lot easier to play it a lot faster. The C major scale that we just played started on C and ended on C. And like I said before, other instruments, it's kind of easier to start on the note you want to start on and end on the note you want to end on. But with guitar, because of all the strings and everything, typically when you're taught a scale pattern, you'll kind of learn every note in the scale that's in the area. You won't just learn from C to C, because as you can see with the pattern we just played, you're not learning any notes on the low E string or the high E string. And it's good to know those notes to build your picture of the fretboard and also to have access for solos. So the last thing that I want to add to this little demonstration is if you're Googling C major scale pattern, or if your teacher or video taught you a pattern like this, that's why the pattern goes across all the strings, and that's why the patterns don't usually start on the name of the scale. So if we're trying to play just every note that's in easy vicinity of this C, then it makes the most sense to start with the low E string, so open E. And then note, because it's the C scale, we know there's no sharps or flats, so if you just think about playing every open note, F, G, A, B, C, and then you can think about the pattern we just played. And then you can just keep going and play the notes that have no sharps or flats. How can you continue to apply what we just learned and do similar exercises to what we just did? Well, I'd say there's 2 main domains that you could work on. The first one is maybe continue focusing on the C scale, because it's easiest to understand, it's easier to remember, there's no accidentals, it's all just natural notes. And what you can do to practice and see and test yourself and see if you understood the concept is, now I'm not going to do it with you, and this is for you to practice. I'm just going to start it. Since we just practiced C lower on the neck, you could practice the C major scale higher on the neck. And it will be a little bit more challenging because hopefully you have the open strings memorized because of our fabulous acronym. Well, as you get higher on the neck, you don't have that kind of easy acronym to remember what notes are where. But that's also a good challenge because it'll help you continue to build your picture of the fretboard while you're also practicing a major scale. So I'm just going to tell you that on the 8th fret of the low E string, there's a C note. And so you could challenge yourself and try building the C major scale from there. So if you wanted to play it on the single string first, you can do that. And then you can think about, okay, how can I play that more efficiently? How can I incorporate other strings? So if we start on C again, we know that the next note is going to be D. And I don't have the open strings to make things easy, but I do know the 5th fret of the A string is the same as the next open string, which is D. And then we have a whole step, and you continue from there. So that's something that you can work on your own. And you can actually start on the C from the D string also if you want, and you can just try at different places on the neck and challenge yourself that way. The second domain that you could practice is to do exactly what we just did with C, but try it with a different scale. And that can be a little bit trickier because you have to hold some accidentals in mind. So as we mentioned briefly in the last video, maybe the G scale, which only has one accidental, the F is sharp, all the other notes are natural notes, or the D scale, which has 2 accidentals, C is sharp, F is sharp, everything else is natural. Don't worry about memorizing that. It'll come with time as you practice those scales and repeat those notes to yourself. But for example, maybe you could challenge yourself to figure out the G scale. Start on G and then think, okay, here's the single string scale, and I can really vividly see the whole step and half step patterns. Let me challenge myself to make it more horizontal. G, so we know the next note is A. That's a whole step away. And then a whole step, and then a half step, and go from there. So those are 2 different ways that you can practice what we just learned to help you understand major scales even better, and even more importantly, help you continue to unlock the fretboard and understand how all the notes fit together. I am not here to teach you how to play guitar from step 1. I think there are much better teachers for that, honestly, and I think those videos already exist in terms of like the technique and what order you should learn certain things. My goal with these videos is to help you understand music theory in a way that is not memorization, that is learning, and that you can apply directly to your playing and apply directly to figuring out songs or writing your own songs. For that reason, I'm not going to recommend a lot of scale patterns that you learn. The things that I just recommended to you are things that you can figure out by yourself without any external aids, just using the knowledge that we've learned in these videos and using like the 3 or 4 tiny things that we've memorized that are very memorizable. So you definitely should be practicing scales and playing scales because they're really important for technique. They improve your finger dexterity. They're the basis of solos. So those are really important. That information is not going to come from me. That information exists elsewhere in a much better form than I could ever express it to you. So I really encourage you, if you have never been taught a scale pattern, look up those videos, go to other teachers, they'll explain them to you really well. What I would like to encourage you to do, whatever patterns you already know from videos, books, teachers, continue to practice those. And just practice knowing what notes you're playing. So for example, let's say a teacher has already taught you this pattern, and you could do this with any pattern that you know. Let's say a teacher has taught you that and told you that's one position of the C major scale. What I challenge you to do is to continue practicing that because that's great exercise for your fingers. Just think about what notes you're playing. So I'm not going to do the whole thing, but just really quickly. Okay, I'm starting on the 5th fret of the low E string. So I know that that's the same as the next open string, so I know that's A. And then A, B, C. Okay, so I'm not starting on C, so it's not whole, half, because I'm not starting on C. If I were starting on C, it would be that pattern. That's interesting. That's good to remember, but I know I'm playing the C major scale, so I know that there should be no accidentals. Okay, now I know the next note is D, and that's why I'm playing the 5th fret of the A string, E, and so on and so forth. So when you're practicing those major scales, continue to practice it whatever form you're taught, but really think about what notes you're playing because that'll really help reinforce what notes are in each major key. The goal is not to sit down and memorize 12 major keys in one afternoon. The goal is to consistently expose yourself to what notes are in what keys so that over time, the 5 or 6 keys that you play the most often based on what genres you like will start to become second nature and start to become easier for you. But wait, Kat, you might be asking, my teacher showed me some pentatonic scales. My teacher has been talking about minor scales. I play jazz and I've learned 45 scales that I don't even know the names of. Well, listen, that is the perfect segue into the next video, because we've been focusing really hard on the major scale, which I think of as kind of the basis of everything. Different people conceptualize it in different ways. We're going to talk about that more next time. We've been talking so much about the major scale, but in the next video, we are going to talk about other types of scales and how they relate to the major scale. So we're going to be talking about minor scales. We're going to be talking about pentatonic scales. We're not going to be talking about all those crazy jazz scales because I myself am not a jazz player, but we will touch on topics that are relevant to you too if you're a jazz player. So that is my advertisement for the next video. I really hope that you'll subscribe so you know when it's coming and you can watch it. But before I leave you now, let's go to the summary. It's that time again. The first thing we talked about in this video were the important concepts to remember from the last video. And that's on the last summary, so I didn't include it here. And then we spent a lot of time talking about how to change a vertical scale, a single string scale, like we practiced in the last video. So here I have the C scale written all on one string on the A string starting on the 3rd fret. And we talked about using our knowledge of the fretboard to play that more horizontally or across different strings. And so I tried to show, don't know how well it turned out, in one color going up and then in another color playing the exact same notes except on different strings. And when you're practicing playing a scale vertically versus horizontally, these are not official terms, but I think they make sense for what we're talking about. You can continue to think about that really important major scale pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Or you can think about it in terms of note names. So I wrote down the C scale here because that's what we were practicing, but if you were practicing the D major scale, for example, you would write down the letters of D, figure out where the sharps are. In the case of the D scale, there are sharps. And then you would go from there. So you can be thinking about both of those, or you could think about one of those things while you're figuring out the horizontal scale. And then we talked about different ways to continue to apply this knowledge in practice. And the other thing that we talked about is I've written down the C scale very cleanly here, so starting and ending on C. But remember, for the purposes of soloing melodies, because of the layout of the guitar, typically if you Google a major scale, you'll see notes on every single string. And that's useful for knowing where the notes are and for understanding the fretboard, but that can be confusing conceptually if this is your first time really understanding what a major scale is. So that's just kind of a warning. Well, everyone, I know I had so much fun talking about major scales. I hope that you had fun too. I kind of gave you a preview before the summary of what the next video is, but in the next video, we are going to be talking about other types of scales, especially like pentatonic, minor. We'll see what else I come up with. So I'm really excited to talk to you about those topics. If you're excited too, then I hope that you'll subscribe so you know when those videos are coming out, when that single video, which is the next video, is coming out. And I hope that if you enjoyed this video, you'll like it. And I really, 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 really hope that if anything in this video did not make sense to you, or if you'd like more clarification, or if you have more questions about any concepts in this video, or you want more tips on practicing, please leave me a comment. My goal with these videos is to make them the videos I wish I had when I was learning guitar at the beginning. And so I really want to make these useful for you. And the more questions you ask me, the more that I can help you and the better I can continue to make these videos in the future. So if you had any questions about anything I talked about, please ask them, and good luck practicing. And I'm so excited to see you again in the next video as we continue to talk about more about scales and more about scales other than the major scale. Very exciting. Well, until the next one, guys, thank you for watching. Bye.